Welcome to Encounter Grace, where we come face to face with God's work in the world for our good. Join host Jason McKnight as we explore practical issues of community, theology, and leadership in everyday life.
Hey, welcome to Encounter Grace. We're so glad you're here. I'm Jason McKnight, and as always, I'm here with Ben Hendricks, and I want you to picture the scene with me. It's a delivery room in the hospital. The nurses are gowned up, the doctor's there, the mom is in labor, contractions pushing the littlest member of the family toward daylight. Every few moments, another cry of joy and pain. Dad is anxiously holding his wife's hand, wishing he could help, secretly glad he can't do more. Action and energy coalesce around the baby is finally here, and everything in the room stops, and everyone holds their breath until that first breath of air fills the little lungs, and that first cry comes out of the mouth. And then we all heave a giant sigh of relief and start high-fiving and crying and all that kind of stuff. What an exhausting, exhilarating, joy-filled, life-giving moment. Well, I'm glad you're with us today, because what we're going to talk about today is the joy and miracle and beauty and wonder of life and of birth and life in the womb. Every January for 50 years has been a time, at least in our country, where we reflected on the sanctity of life. And in the Roe v. Wade era, it was a time for a lot of people to make political statements and seeking legal frameworks. But let us ignite our imaginations and let us think about wonder and marvel of what's going on in the womb and what is this little thing called a baby and how to wonder. Well, in order to do that, we've invited a good friend to many in Eastern North Carolina, a good friend to Susan and me, and to Ben and Janessa, Dr. Frank Gay, to share some of his journey and studies and joy. So, Frank, thank you for taking the time to be with us.
You're welcome. Thanks so much, Jason. It's good to be here.
We are glad you're here, and we just had lunch together, so we're all enjoying a great time of fellowship. And I apologize. I should have asked permission to call you Frank.
Please, I'll be offended if you don't.
Okay, good. Here in public, I don't know how it's supposed to work with with folks. So let's establish your credentials. Why do we have you here after all? How long have you practiced?
I finished my training in 1990, so 32 years ago. And after
1990 is 32 years ago?
I think so.
Wow, we're all
scary.
Okay.
Wow. Do the math, but I think so. Wow. Actually, it's now 2023, so it's
coming up on
23. So, after 4 years in the Air Force, I've spent the last 28 years here in Greenville, North Carolina.
Greenville, North Carolina at Vidant?
Yes. Vidant, now ECU Health. It's changed its name several times.
Okay. I actually didn't know that either. I'm out of the baby side.
Wow.
So how many babies have you delivered? Do you keep track?
I have not kept track. It would kind of be nice to know, but I've sometimes guessed around 7,000. But it's a hard number to keep up with.
Wow.
Depends a little bit how you count them. So.
Twins count for two.
7,000.
So. Well, it depends on if there are two of us there,
right.
particularly during traiing.
Yeah, that's true.
Is that like sex where you split the birth? Like,
wow. So, 7,000 babies owe their lives to you, including our firstborn.
That's right.
And boy, it got serious. Well, we'll talk about that a little later. It got serious when the cord was wrapped around his what got you into medicine?
I think I've always wanted to be involved in a profession where I could help people. I felt that medicine was a noble calling. It was an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. So kind of through high school, I thought that would be something to do. I also felt I had an aptitude for it. And while I didn't know this then, Aristotle's words of where does my skill set and the needs of the world intersect as far as vocation, quickly saw that as being something where I would fit. While I was in high school, I burned myself making popcorn, and I spent 2.5 weeks in the hospital. This was probably before length of stay criteria.
Also before air poppers.
Yes. It was the oil in the popcorn.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But God did use that time to shape me. I realized that I was very well cared for physically and also as a person by the people who were caring for me. And so that solidified that desire to go into medicine.
Yeah, to help people. And you did not grow up in North Carolina.
I did not. I grew up in New York. I thought I was coming to the Deep South for my education, and met Jesus and met my wife, and here I am.
Now, that's what we want to talk about next. Well, Debbie, Jesus.
Debbie would be a good one, too.
We love Debbie. But when did you come to Christ? So you met Christ in North Carolina.
I did. I grew up going to a church, but the idea of a personal relationship and of me needing to somehow be forgiven for my sin was not something that was taught. As a freshman, I was quickly, by other people, recognized that I wasn't a Christian before I did. And so probably the first part in my conversion was recognizing that I was not a Christian. And some dear brothers led a Bible study, met with me one-on-one, and gradually came to believe that the gospel was real and that Christ had died and that I had a need to walk in that.
And this was at a secular university.
It would be at Duke. Most would describe that as a secular university.
I've heard that. But friends on the dorm.
Yes.
And so friends on the dorm took an interest, you prayed for you and met with you and so on and so forth.
Wow.
You know, like we often think, everything's, it is easy to think everything's going wrong in big state schools or secular universities, except that also God has Christians there.
He does, and he's at work there, and he's in there a life at a time.
One life at a time.
And that would be true whether you're practicing medicine or selling shoes on the street. That's true.
Now, well, Ben, I'm doing all the asking here.
Yeah,
let me ask one more, and then I'll let you jump in.
Okay, sure.
Well, I realize there's one more in this little section of how, as you sort of on a global scale, because maybe we'll get into details, but just over the arc of your career since 1990, how have you watched God work in and through your life in medicine?
Yeah.
What when you look back and try to put it on a bumper sticker, what have you seen?
Yeah, it'd be a hard bumper sticker, but one of them is that the gospel's given me an opportunity to see God at work, and medicine is a way to do that, but it's an opportunity to see God at work in pushing back against the effects of the fall. With the fall, everything changed, including sickness and disease, and I get to see God at work in his restoring of his creation. So that's been part of that. I've grown to see that I'm typically a instrument in that it really is God is the one who is at work. I've been in one place where they, somebody cuts down a tree. You don't thank the axe, you thank the person who yielded the axe. That is how I've tried to look at medicine, and that God would use whatever it is that we do to bring glory to himself and to heal his creation. Another way that I've seen God at work is through countless coincidences of God allowed me to be here with this person at this time. This is not something I would have organized. This is not something I could have planned. They ended up on my schedule seemingly by accident or by coincidence, but God obviously had a larger story going on there with that. And I think finally, more recently, I've increasingly seen myself as a wayfarer, to use somebody else's word, in life with my patients, the people I'm caring for. God is at work in both of our lives, and we are walking through this together. We intersect for a period of time, sometimes very briefly, sometimes for a longer period of time, but we are wayfarers in this life that is moving towards Jesus.
Wayfarers in this life moving towards Jesus. Love that.
Yeah.
I think it's such a cool thing, and I know we'll touch on this more a little bit later through the interview, but I just think of every time that I've been around doctors, like in it's around major life changes and life experiences, and how it's such a cool thing. Just in the past little bit, like the main times I've been in a hospital are with my wife. I mean, whether the birth of Harper, our first, or just recently with a minor surgery, and in each place we've had like a believer as a surgeon or a doctor, and it's made all the difference. Like, it's such a place of shepherding and a place of outreach. Like, it's such a cool thing. I mean, it's a great opportunity.
It is an opportunity. In medicine and illness, we are stretched to the limits of our being, and whether it's a joyous thing or a sad thing. So one of the privileges of medicine is being able to walk with people during these formative times of their lives.
Yeah.
It's a privilege to be there.
Amen. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so 7,000 births. Yeah. You've seen all things probably at this point when it comes to birth. Like, one of the things we wanted to talk a good bit about, just what is about the miracle of life. I mean, you get to see it all the time. And so can you kind of walk us through, like, what are the stages of preborn life?
It still is a wonder to me that a woman can get pregnant and have a child. As much as I think I understand about it, it is a miracle. As I think most of your listeners know, conception is something that we don't fully understand, but there's an egg and a sperm that are placed in the same body, and then those join and become one and become something new. That happens out at the end of the fallopian tube. It takes about 5 days for this now fertilized egg to travel back down to the fallopian tube, where it implants in the uterus, the mother's womb. That uterus has to be sufficiently prepared to make a hospitable environment for that embryo to now grow. And as soon as that happens, there are multiple changes that begin to happen in the mother to prepare her for childbirth. First of all, which involves that she doesn't have a period, and that continues to grow there. After implantation, the embryo begins to grow and quickly divides into two different parts, a placenta and the embryo and fetus. The placenta is a wonderful organ. It provides nourishment for the fetus throughout pregnancy, but also protects the fetus. The baby is genetically different than mom, and normally her immune system would attack and reject anything that is genetically different. If somebody has a kidney transplant, we have to give them all kinds of drugs to protect the transplanted kidney from the host recipient. The placenta does that. And so this placenta both provides for nourishment but also protection for the embryo. And that happens right away. Also right away, there begin to become changes in the mom. Increasing amounts of her blood volume begins to increase almost immediately, so that she has increased blood in order to provide for and nourish this growing child. The organs begin to develop. That process starts early on. The uterus provides a hospitable place, and then gradually over a period of time gets to a place where it begins to contract, and out comes the baby.
Wow.
Most of the time. So, yes.
I mean, that's just, even to tell that in such a concise way, it's just marvelous.
It is. Yeah.
That the mom, the placenta is an organ that allows so that the mom doesn't reject the baby growing inside the embryo. I mean, even that piece of it is, evolution's a wonderful thing. No, I'm kidding. How'd that happen? Well,
don't know.
So let me ask you this. Most Christians would say life begins at conception. Is that what you would say, and why?
I would. Absolutely. It is at the moment of conception where a genetically and biologically unique human or creature is made. The sperm and the egg are genetically similar to mom and dad. They are, in a certain sense, not new, but when the sperm and the egg unite at that point, a new creation has occurred by every way that we would describe it.
Yeah.
I think that's a really helpful answer for a couple of reasons. One, it's logical, but maybe even most importantly, it's biblical. And it's not just based on ethics as well. Like, so often when we kind of look at the world of when does this start? When does life happen? We start defining that line. We go, well, we don't want to write an ethical line for at the end of life as well. Like, we just think of it in those kind of terms. But it's helpful to think of it like, no, there's a logical and a biblical idea and argument behind this as well.
There is a fundamental change when an egg and a sperm are separate, that now they are united. Something new has been made and formed.
Yeah. So it's helpful.
Yeah, and to say, oh, well, it's later at viability or it's later at childbirth, that doesn't make any sense, because there's not something new then. It's just our technology.
It's a change with childbirth. It's a change in nothing more than a change in location.
You mentioned this already a little bit, but can you walk us through kind of those major benchmarks of development for a child?
People often ask, well, when does the heart start beating? And the kind of classic answer is 21 to 23 days after fertilization. The early structures that become a heart begin to beat. We're able to typically see that at around 4 weeks or 28 days after conception. There is this confusion between, we talk about menstrual dates and gestational dates, and we don't have to get your group into that. But 28 days post-conception, we can typically see with today's ultrasounds, see some sense of a flicker or cardiac activity. Most of the organs are formed by 12 weeks, and that from that point on, the baby grows, and there aren't, if you will, new organs. A lot of them developing at that time. They certainly change, but the rest of pregnancy is a growth kind of thing.
So formation is the first 12 weeks, and then growth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
they're
simplifying it, and I wouldn't.
Yeah.
But that made sense to me, though. Like, so all the organs are there, and now they grow bigger, 12, 13, 14, 15 weeks,
Right.
and on the way. That's fascinating. When do you tell the sex? How can you tell when?
Well, the sex, of course, is determined at the moment of fertilization.
Okay.
If there is a X-containing chromosome in the sperm, the child will be female. If there's a Y-containing chromosome, it will be male. We can often see that on ultrasound by seeing male genitalia pretty easily, usually by 16 weeks. There's a lot going on way before that. A more recent technology has allowed us to see fragments of fetal DNA in the maternal circulation. So we understand that the placenta allows some of this DNA to cross the placenta. The placenta, of course, is fetal in origin, and so it also has fetal DNA. So there are fragments of this DNA floating around inside the maternal circulation, and by 10 weeks we can now look at that, and we can tell if it's a boy or a girl just because we see Y chromosomes or X chromosomes in the maternal circulation from the fetus.
A blood test in the mom,
right,
and you can see fragments of
fetal DNA.
Wow,
That's
unbelievable.
It is sometime before that, by around 8 weeks, that the testes are beginning in a male child, beginning to secrete testosterone, and the genital tract begins to develop along a male pathway.
Yeah. And that's at 8 weeks.
Yeah, begin to see that.
Mm-hmm. What is the earliest where we are now? Because I know this moves as technology changes, but preterm baby, what's the earliest that we're seeing now?
Yeah.
And we have a great
we have a great neonatal unit just up the road, and so that's up. But yes, through the work of neonatologists and certainly several medications and maybe a little bit of what we can do on the obstetrical side, it for a long time was felt to be around 24 weeks. At around 23 weeks, you'll have close to a 50% survival rate, and then there'll be some that will. Some that will live prior to that, but 55 weeks, 55% of infants born at 24 weeks will survive, 25% at around 23 weeks.
Wow!
And so, God's very efficient in the way He makes us, and the fetus, of course, does not have to breathe. The fetus needs to pump blood. The fetus needs to have a liver that does some things and other organs, but does not need to breathe. Oxygen is provided through the placenta. And so one of the last organs to mature or get ready to work are the lungs. And so that's one of the challenges with preterm birth is now this child no longer connected to the placenta needs to be able to breathe, and that's the challenge to oxygenate it.
Because lungs are later in the process, but
normally,
now they're now they're required to be working.
Right. Yeah.
So tell us then about lungs and liver. And I was reading, so I don't know, Frank, maybe maybe you don't, maybe you think this isn't, and everybody knows this, and it's like first semester class at med school. To me, this was unbelievable to think of how it works, that the lungs and the liver have to come right on track the moment the first breath, and that God's worked it all. And tell us a little bit about that. Just give us a little marvel.
A little bit. So for the fetus, the oxygenated blood comes in through the placenta, goes through the liver, and is pumped into the heart where it bypasses the lungs and goes immediately across the heart into the part of the heart that pumps blood preferentially to the brain, and then the rest of the body. And the reason is there's no oxygen in the lungs. There is no air inside the lungs prior to birth, and so it bypasses that. When the baby's born and takes his or her first breath, all of a sudden that changes, and the baby begins to make half of its blood go to the lungs where it can receive oxygen and come back and then go out to the body, which is, of course, is what is happening to you and me right now. Our heart pumps blood both to the heart, or both to the lungs and to the body, and the fetus has to do that with that first breath. And so the blood flow ceases to go across the heart and rather goes out to the lungs and immediately comes back. and that bypasses the liver. We don't have all this blood coming back from the placenta, and so as soon as the umbilical cord is cut, that stops.
That's amazing. That's just amazing. Like,
it is.
see, Ben, you got Ben with
Yeah.
he's almost got the smolder.
That's amazing. Did that just happen? I mean, like
Incremental
I know
evolution, Ben.
I know my
Incremental
daughter's really
evolution.
smart, but I didn't know she was that talented. Man.
Well,
But you were that smart when you were
wow.
born too.
What happened after that? That's the question.
So that was when I was reading Witt and Wicker, their book A Meaningful World, how genius explains, how genius you cannot have genius in a world without a genius behind it, without God. And that paragraph or two alone, I've come back to that 10 times because I'm like, that's why it doesn't work for there not to be God in the mix and it just to be eons of incremental evolution, because you can't have a system that's not used be ready to be used. Has to be designed.
And the other part of it that's, to me, equally taking care of pregnant women is there are immediately changes in the mom. During pregnancy, her blood volume is increased by 50%. All childbirth involves some blood loss. She is very well prepared for that blood loss in a way that you and I are not, or she is not when she's not pregnant.
Right.
And that process begins to go back immediately with childbirth as well. And so... and then the other thing that obviously happens is her body is preparing for lactation throughout pregnancy, and then as soon as the child is born, there are changes in the breast that allow colostrum to begin to be made so that she can now feed this child.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Yeah, that's right. And it wasn't needed before the child is there.
Right, yeah, so there wasn't a need to have it. And again, God's very efficient in how he does this. So
He really is. Well, tell us about, if you can, I mean, 7,000 babies. You must have just been on your knees with joy at some of the miracles or experiences. I mean,
So some are fun, and you just have to laugh. I remember one where I was doing a C-section on a woman who did not know whether she was having a boy or a girl, and rather than tell her, I would often just hold the baby up, and they can learn that the same time. And for her, as I held up the child over the drape, the penis that she was looking at obviously worked because he peed immediately all over her face
all over her.
in the moment of delivery.
That's so great.
I'm sure it was not the first time that she was urinated on by her child, but
last time, yeah.
Oh yeah, it was the first time. It's not the last time. A second one, and this is one that happened many years ago now, but I was taking care of someone pregnant with twins, and throughout the pregnancy, she was concerned about one of the twins who wasn't moving as much as the other, and we kind of labeled them A and B during the course of pregnancy, but B just didn't move as much as A, and we would do tests, and everyone looked fine, but B wasn't moving as much as A, and I was able to deliver the babies, and they were both fine, and all was good. And I've known this woman now for quite a long time. When the babies were 2, B wasn't moving as much as A. When the kids went to middle school, B didn't move wasn't as active as A. And now they're both adults, and B is not as active as A. And just
Type B, type A.
Well, I wasn't going to type them, but just the sense that not only are we physically being formed, but are in some way our personalities, our nature, are obviously evident in utero, and you see these things that occur before birth that carry on after birth, and that's neat to see.
I'm sure I heard Daniel singing.
Only because you were singing to him throughout Susan's pregnancy,
singing off key and everything.
So. There was one last story that comes to mind. This was another twin delivery, and the delivery of twins are a little bit more stressful. Once the first one comes out, it's not like things are done. We're in a delivery room that has the ability to do a C-section. There's a team from the NICU there. I have things to do. Of course, mom's labor is not done because she has another child to deliver, and we have to kind of prepare for many contingencies in that moment. And so we were doing that. And in this case, it took 30 or so minutes for the second twin to be born, that she was just laboring and all that. And as it turned out, the woman's mother was in the delivery room. And I looked over, and she, who had been keenly involved in the labor of her daughter up until then, was now off in a corner holding her grandchild, just staring into this newborn life, totally oblivious to the fact that we were doing all these things with her daughter and the birth of the second grandchild, and just the innate joy that she had looking into the eyes of her grandchild. So it's obvious to everyone, even in the craziness of a delivery room. So,
I mean, Ben, what was it like when Harper was born?
I think I've blocked all of that out of my memory. Yeah, I had a traumatic experience, and mine went completely fine. So I feel for everybody who had to really go through it.
Well, I mean, in general, men would not do very well in labor. Our pelvises are actually shaped different, and the baby wouldn't fit out real well. But I think my personality,
our personality too,
wouldn't do it either. So.
No, it's true. Women are stronger. They're stronger. We are wusses. We got more muscles, and we'll defend our families. But man, a mama bear. And I remember, and we referenced this earlier, but when our oldest was born, and you were delivering him, and I was going to cut the cord, but he came out with the cord wrapped around his neck and his arm up in it, and I mean, you went into business mode. I mean, it was like everyone knew exactly that. Yeah, this is really serious. Let's get it straight right away. And thank you.
You're welcome. We'll let you cut it next time.
Well, we tried that the next time, but Daniel, he came out too fast, I think. I don't remember.
I think he cut it himself.
Daniel's pretty self-reliant. Well, and then actually, Frank, so this pivots then to another part of our conversation, but you delivered our third son, who died in the womb. And I know that wasn't the first time you've had to shepherd people through difficulties, whether at birth or trying to, conceive and have birth or things like that. But you were such a gift to us then. How did you, did they teach that in med school, how to shepherd people?
No.
I mean,
short answer is probably not.
So how did you become such a good shepherd there? And you were not going to say you're good. But
so I don't know that I'm good. The theoretical answer to your question is and this would be true for members of the church, really, with any suffering, but to try and develop empathy, which is a little bit different than sympathy. Empathy being the idea of me trying to understand how somebody feels in a particular situation, rather than just saying that situation is bad or that situation is hard. So that would be the kind of big theoretical part of that. You reminded me of something that I said to Susan and you right after Joshua was born, that there was nothing that she could have done to have caused this or prevented that. And that comment grew out of an awareness that that's the first place our minds tend to go when something hard happens. What could I have done that would have caused this? How could I have prevented that? And so to acknowledge that and to empathize with that she's going to be having that feeling, and she had nothing to do with causing that, causing Joshua's death, but to remind her of what maybe at some level she knows to be true, but to remind her of and to think about what somebody would be feeling in that situation, I think is helpful. So yeah. I can speak some other thoughts to that if you'd like. When you think about Job, the story of Job, Job's friends did lots of things wrong. But the first thing they did was sit with Job and not say anything for a week. And that's would be another part of helping to walk with people through hard times, is to try and say very little. Many people have said something along the lines of, don't just say something, stand there, when trying to talk about that. There are lots of things that are not good to say. And
I think I've said them all.
And, maybe we all have said something, that has been hurtful, but there's an author, Kate Bowler, has written some about this, but some of the things that she says that would be good things not to say are, God must have wanted an angel, which is, that's a pretty mean God to take my child away from me to make an angel. It makes God look sadistic. And of course, angels are not made from dead people.
Except for Ben. He's going to be an angel.
Another thing that she writes, and this is in a book, Everything Happens for a Reason, and Other Lies I've Loved, is that phrase of, well, everything happens for a reason. And that does suggest that it is, my sin, my action that has caused this to happen. And she writes in that book, when someone is drowning, the only thing worse than failing to throw them a life preserver is handing them a reason. And so to try and explain into somebody's suffering is not helpful. Another thing that's not helpful is, well, at least it's not X. And compare this suffering to something that could be worse, which really does minimize the suffering that you're feeling. You fed me this question in advance, and so the other thing that I thought of, the second answer, those are some things to maybe say and not to say and to try and empathize. But the other one would actually come to you, Jason, as a pastor, and that's the opportunity that we have to prepare ourselves for suffering before it happens, to be shepherd in that. We are all going to suffer and experience loss in some kind of way, and we need to kind of have the toolbox to deal with that. The time to quote Romans 8:28, that God works all things together for the good of those who love him, isn't when you have lost your child. Right. But to have that be preached to you, be taught to you before and after, that can be helpful. So.
I remember at my dad's funeral, and back in those days you had cassette tapes, and somehow I got a copy of the tape, and so over the years I have listened to it a few times, and but Keith Price, who preached for my dad's funeral, and he one of the things he says, just never forget in the darkness what you've learned in the light. But if you haven't learned it in the light, you don't have it in the darkness. So Romans 8:28 is, you need to know it in the light,
right?
But then you don't need to spout it off to someone in the dark times. It's interesting because a few years ago, our elders here at Grace said we need to help people walk through suffering. And so we put together a pastoral letter on suffering, and it's on our website, and people can download it, and do. And we sent it out to everyone when it was first published about 4 or 5 years ago. But just some of these ideas of why does it happen and how, and then also how do we walk through it? And and really, I think the high point of Job was the friend sitting quietly,
right,
until God shows up.
Yeah,
and then that's the high point.
Always ends with God.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Dr. Gay, I'm curious, do you...
I'm Frank.
Okay.
Here.
So, Dr. Gay, do you pray with like your patients, or, I mean, when the ladies come in? I'm just curious.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I will invite them to pray. I will ask them if they would like to pray about whatever it is. And I don't pray with all of them, but we'll ask their permission,
Sure.
Or invite them to that.
Yeah. I mean, my experience is different because but so many people probably that come in are not believers. Do you ever have any that get upset about it, or like I feel like it usually would bring comfort? Whether
I've never had anyone say no to that question. I certainly try and be aware and sensitive in the spirit of, is this something that this person would want or enjoy or receive, and to do that. So
okay.
Well, it's such a humble posture too, because if only more of us would have that courage in more of our lives, because it's not just a doctor that can ask that, but a car mechanic can ask that, and hey, well, would you mind? Well, let's pray about this. It's interesting because just this weekend, somebody locked their keys in the car, and a friend on the police force came up, and they were working on it together, and couldn't get the door open. I mean, they were just working for long enough, and they tried several doors. Right. So it's like, well, they can't get a door. And then somebody prayed, because there were about 4 people looking at them from the inside because it was warm. And somebody said, well, Lord, just open the door. 10 seconds later, the door's open. Sometimes the Lord just wants to be invited in. Yeah. And nobody was doing anything wrong before then. So I'm not, but I got to be in on that. That was fun to watch.
Well, there's certainly been times that I have prayed to myself for someone in a clinical situation. And it kind of gets back to the Wayfarer comment. God is working in my life just as much as he's working in the lives of the people I'm caring for. And if he chooses to, when I pray that bleeding would stop, and it does, I'm thankful to God for him stopping that. So.
Yeah. Well, we marvel at what we've learned about what's going on in the womb and what's going on in the room, the delivery room, and on from there. You like that little rhyme?
For sure.
That's good.
And Frank, I know you're busy, and I know you're bringing excellent care to folks and true shepherding to so many in our community over the years, and in the future. You're taking some seminary classes now because God's saying, well, keep preparing. I love that. You're 30 years into your career, and God's got you preparing still more. So thank you for taking the time to shepherd us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's good to be here.
So our blessings to you and to Debbie and everyone. Thank you for joining us here, and we can't wait to be back together. In the meantime, keep encountering grace because God's out there all the time. Thanks.
This is a ministry of Grace Fellowship Church in Kinston, North Carolina. Visit gracekinston.org or follow us on Facebook